And so this architecture is everywhere, and also it's in ChatGPT, for instance. So I think it's quite nice to study it. Okay, so just a quick reminder of what we did last time. So we talked about the encoder-decoder architecture, which is not specific to NLP, but it's useful. So you could encode a sentence into a fixed size vector, and you then have a decoder that knows the vector space here, which we call the latent space, and the decoder from a vector can recreate a sentence. So it could be the original sentence or a sentence in another language, or you could also like randomly sample the vectorial space here, and a vector would be decoded as a sentence by the decoder, but it would not originate from any original sentence. It would be a random vector. And if the vectorial space is meaningful enough, smooth enough, the decoder can then sample it to create sentences. So we've seen that our recurrent neural network has several steps of encoding, and through the steps, it passes information from the beginning of the sentence, and the decoder does the same, but with the word it generated. So it passes a state that takes into account the original vector and the other words generated, and also it takes as input the previous word it has generated. So that's autoregressive generation. So we're going to see what attention is. I've shown you last time the right-width transformer, which is based on GPT-2, which is now less impressive because ChatGPT is doing way better, but it's still the same principle. And so here you have an example of generation, and we're going to see how the text encoder process the sentence. So basically, during this, within a sentence, the words have dependencies. And we saw last time that the standard RNN had difficulties retrieving dependencies that were from many words ago. And that can be harmful for the encoding or the generation of the sentence. And so you can represent the preserving of information as a window, basically. And you can see that the standard RNN has a short reference window. So, well, if a word refers to another word that is further away in the sentence, it won't be able to retrieve the meaning. It would have lost the meaning. With the LSTM and the GRU, you extend the window, but still you have a problem. And actually, with the transformer, we're going to create a network that has virtually an infinite, let's say, window of reference. Well, it's actually finite because, like, you have a limit to the size of the sentence that you can process. Usually, it's like 512 words. I think that would be the standard. So it's long enough, let's say. So I'm going to define attention first, and then we're going to see how it's implemented in the transformers. So attention is originally a language processing term, even though it refers to also some neuroscience concepts. And it was used originally for text generation, and it was used to look at the previous states of the generator. And when you look at the states, you can actually weight them differently according to the context. And that allows you to create a new context vector that takes into account basically all the sentence and differently with different weights on each word depending on the context. So that's what I've just said. So we can also say it differently. We can say that attention is a component in a neural network that would quantify interdependence on the original data. So that would be between the input and the output, but it can also be within the input. So it would depend if you're a encoder, decoder, or just encoder. So you have the encoder decoder that you should know by now. And what we're going to do, we're going to add a mechanism here in the decoder that is going to look at the states of the encoder, and that's going to weight each hidden state differently depending on the context. So what you have when you're decoding, you have your standard decoder that passes the hidden state from one state to another. You also have your new inputs, right? But also you're going to add a new hidden vector that is going to be a weighted sum of the hidden states of the encoder. So a weighted sum of the hidden states here. And so you can do it, actually, you can do it in two directions. Like you could have an encoder that encodes from left to right and from right to left, but that's not relevant here. The most important part to know is that the weights are going to be learned by another neural network. So you add a neural network that is going to calculate the weight you're going to give each of the states, of the encoder states, depending on the context here. And by doing so, you're going to extract the relevant information of the encoding part to create a better output of your decoder. So is that clear? Okay. So that's basically the principle that was implemented originally. So it's based on an LSTM encoder decoder. Now we're going to switch to another kind of architecture, which is a transformer, which is no longer recurrent and which is not an LSTM. So the goal here would be to similarly to weight the input information in a decoding step. So when you're translating a sentence from English to French, for instance, each word of the original sentence has a different impact on the word you're going to generate in the French sentence. So for instance, obviously, when it's let's say a literal translation, the corresponding words are super important for each other. So how is going to be super relevant for comment. Day is going to be super relevant for journée. But then you can see that here it's a bit more blurry because the structure in French and in English is different, but still you have to weight, like the information of the original sentence are going to be weighted differently to generate these words. Yeah, so that's just a visual representation of what I've presented before. I just want to like link back to something that was said to you in a previous session. What we're going to say about the text can also be used for the sentence, given that we split the sentence into a sequence, because transformers are made to process sequences because it's an NLP algorithm. So it does not work for images as such. But if you transform your image in a sequence, you can basically have the same process of thought and encode each part of the image as sort of a part of a sequence. And that allows you to create transformers for image processing. So I can look back to that later if you have any question and if you want some details. But basically, you just have to remind during this presentation that what we're going to say about sentences can be said of images if you split the images as a sequence. Okay, so we're gonna dive into the actual transformer architecture, which is for now a black box. So originally the transformer was designed for an encoder-decoder task, a translation task actually. But now the transformer can be used, actually is mostly used as a pure encoder to generate nice vectors that you can use, or as a pure decoder, for instance, to answer a question like in ChatGPT, for instance. ChatGPT is based on GPT, and GPT is a pure decoder, and it's a transformer. So the architecture is just as the standard encoder decoder, let's say from afar. So I'm showing it to you. I mean, this type of architecture you should already know, right? But I'm showing it to you in the way that we're going to present it and dissect it in this presentation. So the first thing about the transformer architecture is that it's not one single encoder and not one single decoder, but it's actually stacked blocks of encoders and decoders. So that means that the sentence here is going to get encoded by a first block, but then the second block is going to encode the output of the first block, and so on and so on. And then the last block is going to output some vectors, and these vectors are going to be used by the decoder, and the decoder are also going to be stacked. So you're going to have something that is going to generate a sentence, but the already generated sentence is going to pass through stacked decoders, basically. And so it's going to get decoded and decoded and decoded, and etc. etc. And then if we zoom in on an encoder block, you have two small blocks. One that is self-attention, and we're going to dive into that because that's the main improvement of the transformer. And then on top of that, you have a feed-forward neural network. So that would be like the standard linear layer or dense layer, depending on how you call it, that is used for something else. Okay, so the self-attention mechanism is an attention mechanism based on the input itself. So we saw the attention mechanism while generating a sentence. You would use the encoder hidden state to better generate your next word. But the self-attention is not used in a generation task. It's used in an encoding task. And so basically you have an input sentence, and for each word in a sentence, you're going to weight the other words of the same sentence in order to enrich the encoding of the words. So let's say you have a standard word2vec, right? Each word is a vector. In the context of a sentence, you're going to enrich each of the encoding of each word by the encodings, by a weighted sum of the encodings of the other words. And so, for instance, in the sentence, the animal didn't cross the street because it was too tired. The encoding for the animal are going to be super important to enrich the encoding of the word it, because the encoding of the word it without any context is super generic, but in this context, it's going to represent the animal. So we want the encoding of it to be enriched by the encoding of animal, because it in this sentence represents the animal. And you can also see that it's going to get enriched by the action the animal is doing, the location it's doing, in which the scene is happening, and the adjective related to the animal. So that's one way of weighting it. But you can also, like with another attention weighter, you could enrich the encoding of it differently. And maybe it would be more about the adjective of the related to the animal, rather than the fact that it's an animal. And actually, it depends on the network, how you train it. And what we're going to do is we're going to have several networks calculating different weights in the sentence and be trained to extract different kind of information and to enrich each word differently in the transformer. So basically, when you're encoding, you have your input, which is the sentence. Then you have the one-hot encoding that is transferred to a Word2Vec-like embedding. Then we're going to add some signal that I'm not going to detail here for now. And then this embedding is going to pass through the encoders. So through the self-attention and the feed-forward, then another set of attention, then another feed-forward, which means that you're going to here have, let's say, a decontextualized embedding that is going to pass through the first encoder. At the end of the first encoder, you're going to have a contextualized embedding that for each word that is going to pass to an other encoder that is going to calculate another type of context given this contextualized embedding, and so enrich even more each word embedding, and so on until you have your final vector, which is like your super enriched embeddings for the words. So that means that when you encode a sentence with a transformer, actually you don't have an encoding that is, let's say, 300 dimensional. You have an encoding that is 300 dimensional times the number of words in a sentence, or actually times the max number of words that the encoder can process, which is 512, as I said. So at the output of the encoder stack, you have 512 vectors of, let's say, 300 dimensions that have been enriched from the original Word2Vec-like embedding at the bottom here. And then given these embeddings, we are going to calculate some matrices that are going to inform the decoder to generate the output sentence. And so the decoder is going to work autoregressively. It's going to take all the embeddings of the encoder, and it's going to generate the first word. And then it's going to take the first word it generated plus the other embeddings and generate the second word. And then it's going to take the beginning of a sentence it generated and plus still the embeddings and generate the third word, etc., etc., etc. So here it looks a bit like a recurrent neural network actually in the decoding part. Yeah. Do you have any questions so far? No. You can also ask me to go back to a slide and to re-explain and try to explain differently if you miss a slide or something. Right? All right, so I'm going to tell you about the BERT architecture and then the GPT architecture. So here you've seen the overall architecture of a transformer. I have the slides to dive into the details of the encoder and the decoder, but I think it's probably not super relevant right now. So I'm going to tell you how to train, actually how one of the standard transformer encoder is trained, because that's something that you still use. This architecture is still used now as a state-of-the-art model. And you could use also that type of architecture to classify, I don't know, as I said in the beginning, diagnose medical reports, for instance. So here you have, for instance, a classifier that classifies spam or not spam on emails, but you could have medical reports and you don't know if it's a report that originates from a positive diagnosis of cancer or a negative one. And you might want your model to classify that for you. So you could use BERT for that kind of task. So I told you in the previous class that one of the standard ways to train a text model is to train it on a very generic language task in order to capture all the details of the grammar, the meanings of the word, etc. And then you would fine tune it on a specific task that requires a knowledge on a specific domain, but also the knowledge that it learned on the language as a whole. So the BERT is trained on these what we call semi-supervised tasks, and can then be fine-tuned by you on a supervised task. So a semi-supervised task would be a task where you don't have any label. You just have, let's say, raw data, and you want to create a task on this data that allows you to train the model without having to label your data. You might have seen or will see something about few-shot learning, zero-shot learning, and supervised learning. So that would be in that type of domain, and that's what we're going to train BERT on. Okay. So BERT is trained on two semi-supervised tasks. One would be what we call masked, which is masked word. Well, I don't remember the exact term, but basically it's a sentence with words that are masked, and BERT has to guess which is the missing word. So it's sort of similar to word2vec, but here you actually have the structure of the sentence, while in word2vec you just had the words with no orders. And also you can have several masked words in a sentence. And also the sentence is not of fixed size. So basically you can have any sentence from the human language, and you mask one or several words, and BERT has to retrieve the missing words. So that would be a semi-supervised task because your only data is raw text, and you artificially mask some of the text, and the network has to predict which is the missing word. And to do that, it has to understand grammar, the meaning of the words, etc. And so it allows it to understand language without any label, basically. So that would be the first task. So I think it's called masked language modeling, but I'm not sure. So anyway, you have many sentences, and 15% of the tokens are masked, and BERT has to encode through the transformer encoder each of the words, right? So it outputs a vector for each of the 512 words. So usually the sentence is smaller than 512. So the last tokens are just null token, let's say. And then when a word is masked, the embedding of the word of the mask is actually enriched by all of the words in the sentence, as the transformer knows how to do. And what you can put on top of this enriched embedding is a classifier that, given a vector, predicts which word it should represent with a percentage of likelihood. And so here you have like your whole dictionary, right, in the alphabetic order, and the network here predicts a probability distribution over all the possible words, and the word with the highest probability is replaced in the sentence, and if it's the right word that was missing, then BERT didn't make a mistake, and if it made a mistake, you can then update the weights of the transformer in order to make it better at the prediction next time. Okay. And so you can see that this sentence has actually a special token at the beginning, right? Which is called the classification token. And this token is used to perform a second task that BERT is trained on. So when you can give BERT two sentences that can actually be masked as well. And BERT has to guess whether these sentences follow each other in a paragraph or if they don't. So it's another semi-supervised task, right? You have, let's say you extract all the entire and like the whole Wikipedia, and you can take two following sentences, input them to BERT, and it has to say yes, these sentences follow each other in a paragraph. Or you could take two random sentences from your data set, and BERT has to say no, these sentences don't follow each other in a paragraph. And to do that, BERT has to have an understanding of the whole sentence. And so you don't train a classifier on the 512 tokens of your sentence. What you do is you have a classification token at the beginning of the sentence, which is supposed to capture the whole text that you input BERT. And this classification token can be used to classify whether the two sentences that you inputted are follow each other or not. But then it will later be used to classify any sentences on any task, depending on the task that you want to perform. Okay, so given the after having trained BERT on these two tasks, so one is say a local task, which is retrieving one word from a sentence with missing words, and the other is a more global task, which is understanding like the structure of a paragraph. Then BERT has a quite good understanding of the human language, and can then be fine-tuned or actually just used as such in order to perform other tasks. So for instance here, let's say you want to classify emails, whether they are spam or not spam. What you're going to do is that you're going to input the email through BERT, and you're going to use the classification token. So this classification token was used for a classification task, which is the next sentence classification task. So you basically remove here the classifier on top of the classification token, and you replace this classifier by your own classifier, which has the same structure, but is going to be trained on a different task. So here that would be spam. So you input BERT some sentences. You then take the embedding of the classification token, and on top of that, you have a classifier that you train, and that's the only thing that you train. So BERT, you don't train BERT anymore. You only train the classifier on top of BERT, and this classifier has to guess whether the text is spam or not spam. And so if it makes an error, you can basically update the weights of the network in order to make it better at classifying the sentences given the embedding of the classification token of BERT. So it's not even, it's not actual fine-tuning, because fine-tuning would be to freeze most of the weight of BERT, but to leave some trainable and to train some weight in BERT. But here you don't even train BERT, you just train a classifier on top of the classification token embedding of BERT. Is that clear? Okay. And so then you have a way to create any kind of classifier, and we're going to actually do that in the practical session. So if you don't have any question, I'm going to tell you about GPT-2, which is the ancestor of GPT-3 or 4, on which ChatGPT is based. And this is actually a transformer decoder only. So it's basically a sentence finisher, right? In the case of ChatGPT, it would be it's also kind of a not sentence finisher, but let's say paragraph finisher in the case of a conversation. So roughly speaking, ChatGPT has been trained on conversations. And so usually the conversation is a question and an answer, right? And so ChatGPT has been trained, given a question, to retrieve the following text in the data set, which is the answer of the question. And it's a bit more complicated than that, but basically that's it. And so ChatGPT is just trained to complete a text. And the beginning of the text is the question that you ask, and the end of the text is the reply. And then if you add another question or a reply to the reply, it just makes the text longer, and it has to complete the longer text, etc., etc. Yeah, so as I said, so that's basically this example, right? In a standard data, like in a data set, uh, if you ask someone to recite the first law, the answer is going to be the first law of robotics, right? And and so that's what ChatGPT or GPT is trained on, and so that's what you see here. And so to train a GPT, you're also going to do self-attention. So you're going to enrich the meaning of the words in the sentence from the other words. But here, as you're decoding, you cannot input the full target sentence, right? You have to input only a part of the sentence uh, in order to make it learn, right? So let's say you have this input. The output must be the first law, right? And then when you train GPT, you train it on each step of your generation, right? So you would train it on the first step, so it has to generate the word robot, but you can also train it on the fourth step of the generation. So you give it the four first words as if it had generated these words, and it has to generate the fifth one, etc., etc. And so we use self-attention on the sentence of the data set, but it's called masked self-attention because the future of the missing words are masked to ChatGPT because it has to generate them without seeing them, basically. But it's roughly the same principle as the encoder, apart from the fact that it generates the words in the end. So it performs self-attention, then it, given the encoding of the sentence, it has to generate a probability distribution over the vocabulary and decide which word is the most probable next one, and it's trained on that, basically. And so, as I said, a decoder is actually stacked decoder blocks, right? With these self-attention mechanism occurring in each of the blocks. And so you enrich the encoding of the embedding of each word by the embedding of the others. And you do that for each block. And then at the end of the last block, you're going to basically classify over your vocabulary to decide which is going to be the most probable next word. Right? So that's how it works. Right. So I'm just showing it here, like I showed in the encoder part. So to generate the next word of the sentence, you basically are creating next word embedding that is going to be composed of a weighted sum of the embeddings of the previously generated words, and this enriched future word embedding is going to be used with a classifier to classify over the vocabulary to predict the next word. All right, so basically what you're doing is asking each of the words. So that's true actually for the encoder and the decoder. When you create an embedding, an enriched embedding of a word, you're basically asking each of the other words in the sentence how much of their information you're going to add in your word. And you do that with some vectors that are calculated for each of the words. So when you ask the question, you use a query vector, what's called a query vector, which is calculated for each of the word. And the query vector is basically the question you're asking the other words. So the question would be, how much of you do I need to enrich myself? And you're asking that to another vector attached to each of the words, which is the key vector. And so the query vector is going to be multiplied by the key vector. And this is going to give the answer of how much enrichment you're going to get from each of the other words in the sentence. And so the answer would be like a weight between 0 and 1, right? And the sum would be 100%. Should I detail that or not? Maybe I won't. But then, so that's what I was explaining. So when you have your next word embedding, then you have a classifier that is going to create an output on the vocabulary, right? So each of the word in the output is going to be given a value. So here the vocabulary is 50,000 words. And so each of the word of the vocabulary is going to be given a value. And then you're going to transform the value using the softmax function as a probability distribution. And then you can basically state which is the probability for each word to be the next word of the sentence. And actually, I'm stating that because you don't always take the most probable word, depending on what you want to generate. Because for instance, if you always take the most probable word, you're going to have a generation that is super deterministic and not super creative. So you can actually use the probability distribution. So let's say you have 10% chance the first word is, I don't know, chair, and you have 5% that the next word is table, and then 3% that next word is a window, whatever. And you can actually choose to not take the most probable word, but let's say the third most probable word, or randomly choose among the 10 most probable words. And we're going to actually see what we can do in this probability distribution in the practical session, because that's fun. And so I am done with the presentation. I just want to show you some websites, because these are really cool websites that I used for my presentation. So I would say that like the most complete would be the illustrated transformer, because it explains the whole encoding decoding architecture of the transformer. But you also have the illustrated BERT, which is a pure encoder, and the illustrated GPT, which is pure decoder. And this website, so you have a video, but you also have a super detailed explanation on how you create the query and key vector to calculate the weight of each word. And so if you like that kind of stuff, you can dive into it. It's super easy to understand, and it has way more detail than that. I don't want to burden you with too much details. So I skipped many parts, and it's actually super interesting how it's made. And yeah, so if you want to check that out, you'll learn some cool stuff. Okay, let's go to the notebooks. So you have the link, I guess. Maybe not, Clément. So So you should click on the link, make a copy, right? Is it here? Créer une copie. It must be somewhere, right? And then you must check that the type of execution is GPU still, because we're gonna make the calculation on GPU to be faster. Okay, so in this session we will load a pre-trained BERT model, and we're gonna so it's written fine-tune it for a classification task, but actually it's not going to be fine-tuning. It's going to be training a classifier on top of BERT. And then we're going to load a pre-trained GPT-2 model, and we are going to try different ways of generating a sentence using the probability distribution and sampling differently in the probability distribution. So I'm already telling you a really cool thing that you could do if you choose to improve this notebook, because that might be your evaluation, as I said. One super cool thing that you could do would be to use your a pre-trained BERT model to make a classification task on medical data, because here we are not using that, I think. I don't know what we're using, but probably not medical data. I think it's a grammar task. So that would be cool, and that would be useful for you, I think. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. So to use a pre-trained BERT model, it's super easy because we have actually a French corporation which is called Hugging Face, which does that. So Hugging Face is a French American. Well, it's I thought it was only French, but basically probably it's now a bit American. So they allow you to load your model, like the state-of-the-art models, and to use them as such super easily. And so you have basically all the main NLP models. I think now there are probably some visual models as well, and some multimodal models. And so we're going to use that library to load a pre-trained model. Okay. So first, I'm going to state some advantages of so what I call fine-tuning, but which is technically just using a pre-trained model. So the first advantage would be that you don't have to train a model from scratch. So you have something that is usable off the shelf. So you just load the weights and you can use them as such. So it requires basically no computational data, no training data, and just a small GPU to make the inferences with your network. It requires less data because, as I said, to understand the human language, it requires a lot of data and a super generic task. And so to do a language-based task, you first need to understand the structure of the language, and then you need to use that understanding of the structure to perform the task. If you have the pre-trained model, you just have to use the understanding of the pre-trained model to perform your task. So you use way less data, and usually you get better results because well, you don't have the data or the power to pre-train a model on a lot of data, and also by training it on a generic task, it helps you get better results because you basically cannot achieve good results if you train the language model on a specific task. So as before, we're gonna check if the GPU is available and select our default device select the GPU as our default device to perform quicker calculations. And then we're going to install the Hugging Face library to be able to download models super easily and to use them off the shelf. And so here we're going to load a standard grammar evaluation data set to perform a task. So there's like to evaluate the language models, you have several metrics. One of them is the glue metric. And so basically the glue metric is a metric that evaluates the capacities of understanding of the language by your network. So it's a series of tasks on standard data sets. And so we're going to take one of the data sets used in this evaluation, which is the corpus of linguistic acceptability. And we're going to see how BERT performs on this data set. So we're going to download the data set from a GitHub URL. And then we're going to basically look at how it looks. So you have basically sentences, and you have labels on these sentences. So you have good and bad sentences. So yeah. So if it's one, it's a good sentence, right? And if it's zero, it's a sentence that is grammatically incorrect. And so basically you're going to train your network to predict the right label, right? To say whether a sentence is grammatically correct or incorrect. So you have examples of wrong sentences. And so to process your data, so in the last practical session, we were using tokenizers like when we were generating movies, for instance, we had to tokenize our data manually. Actually, when you're using a Hugging Face transformer, you have the tokenizer that is included in the library. So you can download the right tokenizer, the right network, and you can just use them together and everything works, right? So we take the tokenizer for the base version of BERT. And we're going to use the base version of BERT to encode the text, right? And so it does the tokenization by itself. So we need to format a bit the data. So I'm not diving into it because it's basically some engineering, but just know that we're going to have to use the classification token, right? As I said, because we're going to do a classification task. And so the classification token is a summary of the whole sentence. And so this summary, the encoding of the whole sentence is going to be used to classify whether the sentence is grammatically correct or not. So we are going to tokenize the data set. We're going to split the sentence into tokens, and we're going to pad the sentences so that they are all the same length, and we're going to create the intention masks manually and stuff. But basically, in the end, we will have you can have a sentence and the corresponding tokens, right? Then we have to do a training and validation split. So that's what we did last time, right? To evaluate the performance of the network. And then we can create a data loader based on our data in order to train our classifier, and then we're going to test it as well with the validation data loader. And so to train a classification model, you need a special type of BERT, let's say. I mean, not so special, but you need a bit of engineering. And actually, the engineering has been done by Hugging Face. So you just choose a BERT for sequence classification, because that's the task that you want to do. You can also have a raw BERT model here. You can also have a BERT for masked language model. So that would be if you want to perform the demasking task that I presented before. Or you could use BERT for question answering. Well, it's not the best one for that, but still you have like the bit of engineering on top of BERT that you need to perform each of the tasks is already done by Hugging Face. So it's super easy. Then we have different versions of BERT. So I told you the specific task on which BERT is trained, but then you can have BERT with different sizes. So you can have more encoders stacked on top of each other. You can also train it on more or less data. So we have the BERT base and the BERT large. So I think they have different sizes, right? BERT large is obviously bigger, but I think BERT large has been trained on more data that I'm not sure of. But anyway, we can use different types of BERT, and I mean, you could try different models, and you can try. I mean, you can look at the Hugging Face library and choose many types of models and see if you can outperform this standard BERT model I'm using here. And so you can see here that you have like a BERT model. You have some encoders, right? And some output. Yep. And so that's the whole structure of your BERT for sequence classification. Okay, here I'm displaying the parameters, but that's not super relevant for you. What's relevant is that you can choose different batch sizes. You can choose different learning rates. You can choose different number of epochs. So you can try that in order to see if the performance changes. And so here we fix some of the parameters, and we're going to train our models. So what we do is that we are going to extract the data from the data loader. We're going to put them on GPU to calculate every error. We're going to then backpropagate the error on the network and update each of the weights. And we do a bit less steps for the evaluation because we don't have to update the weights, basically. Okay, and here I'm defining a function for accuracy of our task. So basically, we take we are going to iterate through our data loader by extracting batches of sentences, right? Well, we're going to calculate, so we're going to encode them through BERTs. We're going to then calculate the label with our classifier, and we're going to calculate an error, and we're going to update the weights only of the classifier, right? BERT doesn't change here. So yeah, and in the end, we'll have a network that is trained and that we can then evaluate on the validation data set and have the answer of the performance rate. So we have fixed the number of epochs, which means that we are only using training and validation, or training and test. Last time we did a training, validation, and test because like the number of epoch was a parameter, but here I fixed it in advance, so we only did training and validation. So you can see that you have your epochs, you have several batches, right, around 250, and then you complete the training super quickly, and then you have the validations metrics and the training metrics, and you can see that what does that mean? The accuracy has improved, the validation accuracy has improved. So what is actually interesting, let's say here, is that so you have two metrics here, right? You have the error that you make, which is sort of more continuous value, and you have the accuracy. So when you calculate the error, it's not right or wrong, right? When you make a prediction of a label, so the labels are 0 and 1, the error you make is not black and white because you have a probability distribution, right? And you want the probability on the right label to be as high as possible and the probability on the wrong label to be as low as possible, which means that if you make a valid prediction, like the highest of the probability is on the right label, you still have an error, right? Because you didn't predict the right label with 100% certainty, so you can still improve. And even if you made a wrong prediction, you don't have the maximal error, right? Because you still have some probability that the right label is the other label. So it's more continuous. And actually, you can see that we have a bigger validation error, but a better validation accuracy, which means that the network is less certain of the prediction it makes, but it makes more right predictions. Is that clear? So basically, each time it makes a prediction, it's not super certain of the prediction it makes, but most of the time, the prediction is the right one. And so you can actually increase the error, but also increase the accuracy of your prediction. So that means that you have like the highest of the two probability most of the time is the right one, but the two probability are close to each other. While if you have a smaller loss, but a smaller accuracy, so you make less error, but you also are less accurate in predictions, it means that you are a bit more wrong when you make a prediction, but when you make a right prediction, you're more sure of it, right? So that was just the interesting thing, just to say that there is more to it than just a binary classification. Okay. Anyway. So that's what's written here, yeah. So here we are, so it's a bit, the result is a bit confusing, let's say, because we have a bit of overfitting kind of, but also we have an increase of the accuracy. So usually we would say that this is a bad situation, right? Because you want the validation loss to decrease, but then let's say we are lucky and that's it. Okay. So anyway, we fixed the number of epoch. We trained on the validation data set, which was kind of cool. And then actually in the data set, you have a standard test data set, the data set, yes. So in the data set that we're using, it's a standard data set to make an evaluation on the grammatical understanding of our language model. And so the training and the test split is actually fixed. So then what we can do is we can basically compare our network here to the other network that are in the competition for this for the task. So we take the test data set, which is separate, and we can calculate some metrics on it. So here the standard metrics seems to be the Matthew correlation coefficient. So that's not super broadly used, but for this specific task on this specific data set for the specific metrics, that's what we use. And so we are basically going to calculate our Matthew correlation coefficient in order to see how our super easily made network falls on the benchmark of the state of the art. So that's what we are doing here. We are loading the test data set and we are evaluating our homemade classifier. And the answer is here, right? So you have a score per batch. The goal is to have the best score for each batch. And then you can see the total Matthew correlation coefficient. And that would be the metric that is relevant here. And so you can look at the benchmark of all the networks in the world that are competing for that. Okay. Alors, so you have the cola is here. And you can see that we have, so I think it's multiplied by 100. So that would be 52.4. So 52.4 would be, oh, it's not, name. Oh, we cannot sort by, anyway. We are basically as good as the 40 to 50, top 40 to top 50, top 60, let's say, of the networks on this specific task. So obviously these networks are optimized for several tasks in the glue matrix, but let's say that usually on the Cola task, they are like around 40 in the benchmark, they are as good as what we made in like 5 minutes. So just to show you the power of using a pre-trained model for your task. Okay. So you have some further work that I've written here on top of the one that I suggested at the beginning. And then we can go to part 2. Yeah, if you don't have any question, but if you do, feel free to ask. Okay. So let's go to part 2, where we're going to use the ancestor of ChatGPT to generate some sentences. And we're going to do it, let's say, with a mathematical approach, because we're going to look at the probability distribution when GPT is predicting the next word, generating the next word. And we're going to see that there is many ways to sample in that distribution that are going to lead to very different types of sentences in the end. Okay, so you have a bit of math, so that's not super interesting, but that's basically to show you that basically there is like a probability of when you generate the next word in an autoregressive fashion, right? So each word after another. At each step, you have a probability distribution given the beginning of the sentence, right? And this probability distribution is what we're going to look at here. And maybe if you want to have fun, you can try some other models, maybe GPT-3. I don't know if it's available, but it's probably going to get better result than GPT-2. So we reinstall transformers. We already done it, but anyway. And then we are going to look at we're going to use GPT-2. So we're going to take the tokenizer of the shelf, and we're going to also use the model of the shelf. And we are going to take the version that is engineered for language modeling, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to use it as a language model to generate text. And so basically, when you generate a sentence, let's say the beginning of the sentence is just the word the, then you have several choices, right? You have a probability for several words to be the next word. So you can represent that as a tree. So obviously the tree doesn't have 3 branches, right? It has as many branches as the number of words in the vocabulary, but we are only going to represent the most probable words. Otherwise, it's not possible to read it. So the first way of generating a sentence would be to use what we call the greedy search, and is basically at each step to take the most probable word, right? So if you take the word the, and let's say GPT thinks that the most probable word is nice, then you're going to generate nice. And then given the and nice, you're going to generate woman, because woman is the most probable word given the and nice. So that's one way of generating a sentence. And you can see here that we are using it. So we're using the function here. And so you input the beginning of a sentence and you see how GPT behaves given that method of generation. You can see that the sentence that is generated by a GPT is actually super redundant. And it's because, I mean, we are only generating like the most probable words, and the most probable words are a restrained set of words. And that's not actually what we do when we talk, right? We select words from a broad vocabulary, right? And so it seems to not be the best method to use ChatGPT to generate a sentence. So a more sophisticated method would be to make a beam search. And the beam search would be to look at different different options of generation before choosing which one you're going to make. And so if you look at the probability distribution, you can see that if you look like two words down the line, you can see that the probability of generating the sentence "the nice woman" is actually 0.5 times 0.4, right? While the probability of generating "the dog has" is actually 0.4 times 0.9. So that means that the most probable sentences of the two is actually the sentence that that talks of the dog, and not the sentence that talks of the about the nice woman. So here we have a number of beams that is 2. So it means that we are going to look at the two most probable words and then down the lines, right? And then go down the probability distributions. And then if you increase the number of beams, like for instance, if you put the number of beams at 3, then you're going to look at the sentence with the car. And if you put 4, you're going to look at the sentence with the next probable words, which I don't know what it is. And so if a number of beam is 1, you're basically back to the greedy search, right? Because you only take one possibility. And you can generate some words here, and you can check whether the sentences are better. And I think it's actually not the best, right? We have another option here that allows for early stopping. So I mentioned it in like the previous presentation. That would be the fact that the network can by itself generate the end of sentence token, which makes it stop by itself. So that's cool. Anyway, you can remove it to better compare with the previous example and see if it's diverse, but actually it's not. I mean, it's not amazing. Okay. Okay. So here is another way of doing it. Okay, so in the beam search, what you do is that you basically take the most probable sentence, so that creates like very little diversity, because as I said, the human language is actually super diverse, and the beam search is the method that creates the less diverse output, because it always takes the most probable sentence given several beams. And so we're going to try to make our generation a bit more human-like here. And we're going to use a bit more in depth the actual probability distribution of GPT. So here you would have a sample. So the sampling method would be to choose a number. Is it a number? Yes. So it's a number of words that you're going to select. So you're going to say, okay, I want to select. Is that it? Yes. Okay. No, that's not it. So that's just, so no, we're not truncating anything. We're just using the probability distribution. And so here you can see that each next word has a certain probability of being the next word. And what we can do is we can use this probability to make the generation random. So let's say you're generating your sentence and the probability that car is the next word is 10%. It means that if you run the experiment 10 times, one time out of 10, statistically, the word car is going to be selected. But then 4 times out of 10, the word dog is going to be selected in our example here. And 5 times out of 10, the word nice is going to be generated. And so if you do that for each word, you're actually going to create a way more random generation that takes into account the probability distribution generated by ChatGPT. And so if you do that, you make the generation not deterministic, and you can see that the variability of the sentence that you generate is way higher. You can also see that it might be a bit too random, maybe. Anyway, you can see that the sentences are a bit more interesting now. There is another way of doing it, which would be to, where's my title? Okay, that would be to make the distribution sharper in order to reduce the randomness of the sentences that are generated. So here you would exaggerate the probability of the most probable words and diminish the probability of the less probable words. So that would still keep the randomness, but that would prevent GPT to diverge too quickly and to make some generation random. Is that clear now? Okay, and what we can do next is to truncate the probability distribution. So that's what we call top K sampling. And so the top K sampling would be to select, let's say, the K most probable words, and then to select within these K probable words. So that would be a top K here. So that would create a distribution that is less random, right? Because you would remove the possibility of going down the probability distribution, whereas before it would still be possible to select a super improbable word. Okay, so that would increase the coherence of the output. And then you have another way of doing it, which would be to select to fix a number, let's say 90%, and you would take as many words as needed from the beginning of the distribution in order to get to this number. So when you sum the probability of the first words of your probability distribution, at some point, the first, let's say, 10 words are going to make for 90% of the probability of the generation of the next word. And you're going to select these words according to the sum of their probability and put a threshold on the sum. And so that would be a variable top k, sort of. So if your distribution is more equiprobable, it means that you're going to allow for more words to be selected. And if the probability distribution is super sharp, then you're going to reduce the number of words to only a few. And that's basically another way of truncating the distribution, but by keeping the probability of the keyword you select constant, sort of. And that sort of seems to be the most human-like generation for GPT-2 here. And then you can have fun sampling the probability distribution, because obviously as your output is not deterministic, then each time you input the same beginning of the same sentence, just like ChatGPT actually, each time you input the beginning of a sentence, the output is different because there's like a randomness to it, which makes it seem more like the human language. So you can see that when you have a language model, actually, like your work is not done yet, because there is many ways to make it generate a sentence, and there is a fine line between randomness and coherence to make it human-like. So with this example and GPT-2, we can see that it's still a bit weird how it works, right? And basically now with ChatGPT, if you have tried it, you can see that the balance between randomness and coherence has been well engineered, and basically now it sort of works right now. Okay, so just to conclude that what I've shown here with the top P and the top K distribution, there has been some studies about the fact that it generates repetitive word sequences, etc., etc. And obviously, all these research have been put in the ChatGPT engineering in order to make it more human-like. But then I don't think we know all the details of what OpenAI is doing with ChatGPT. But it's going to be interesting when they release everything. Right? Okay, so I'm done here. And so if you have any question about anything, what we've talked about here before, maybe the visual transformer, maybe any lesson from before, or did I say what I do at my work? Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, because we are early. C'est mon stagiaire. Clément, c'est mon stagiaire. Okay, so if you don't have any question online, I'll stop the recording to not make it too long and boring at the end. So I guess goodbye. You can reply just to be sure.
Goodbye. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Ce serait ouf.